Most people kind of know what originalism means. If you ask your mother or your dad, they'll kind of they'll kind of get a sense of what it means. If you ask law students before they get indoctrinated in the common law course, you'll sort of know what it means. But it's been challenged very heavily by the left. For 30 years, they've been banging away at liberals. They've come up with lots of what they believe to be very heady and significant attacks that are unrefutable. So if you ask some of our common law people on the faculty, they'll say, well, originalism has been refuted, period, by the wealth of literature from the left. And some of the theories for the refutation, the change theory, that it doesn't match modern circumstances, that's one. Indeterminate phrases is another. You know, what's equality mean? Conflicting standards as suitors. You have two parts of the Constitution, and in a certain package of facts, both principles apply, and they fight with each other, and the courts, you know, got to declare the difference. That was when Souter retired. He gave one of his rare public speeches, and he said, you can't be an originalist. The Constitution is internally inconsistent on a lot of these cases. You have to call it. Theories of meaning have been used to attack. From philosophy and linguistics have been used to attack the document. And finally, the pragmatics of it. You know, we've come so far from when the document was written. We've done so much, like paper money and the Commerce Clause and other things, that the passage of time just makes originalism totally implausible. We're somewhere else now because our path has been determined before. And we can't just sort of rip the fabric of society asunder and go back, you know, to, in essence, outdoor latrines or something like that. I mean, it's just pragmatically impossible. Now, the originalists have come up with rebuttals to that. And the rebuttals are this flexible originalism. I love this. There's a flexibility to originalism that the attackers didn't see. The originalists are very flexible and can handle a lot of these challenges. Balkin's article, which I did read, says we're all originalists now. Well, his originalism is so flexible that it's not original. It's sort of like the economists under Obama saying we're all Keynesians now. Well, yeah, because the Obama administration has hung its hat on Keynesian economics, and if it doesn't work, we're all in the soup. So I'm rooting for Keynes right now, too, even though I think he was nuts. We're all Keynesians now, like it or not. Well, Balkin's like that. I mean, he comes up with originalism that isn't originalism and makes it flexible and redefines it and then says, look, I'm an originalist, and sort of appropriates this word, so the word is losing meaning. Now we have surrebuttals, which are, well, flexible originalism is still okay because it has critical bite. So we can be flexible and still it cannot be nonsensical somehow. It can have this critical bite. Why? Because some ordinary people still use it in regular debates. Well, maybe. And when you get, you've changed from adduced principle to induced principle. Did I miss something there?
So I changed the terminology from the article to what you see
up there. Adduced to induced.
Yeah.
There's something deep about that?
There is, but people get all confused when I say adduced. So
all right.
It's not meant to mean anything.
So basically, the bite, if you read between the lines in his piece, the bite is when you get into these conflicts in adduced or induced principle determination, you try to figure out what the founders might have done when there's conflicting principles. Okay, that's the critical one. Okay. But then, of course, you buy into all the problems. Try to figure out what the founders would have done. Goes back into all the problems. Doesn't answer all the problems. You've got all these other problems that the liberals have attacked. I'm not sure. It just postpones the critiques a step or two, but all the critiques attached. Now, here's the way I approach it. The Constitution is a social contract. People said we don't mind being governed if we're governed in a certain way. And they ratified the social contract. So it was a ratification vote. We agree to this social contract. You don't have to justify it with all this other garbage. It doesn't have to be justified in natural rights. It's a contract. We will do this, you do that. I don't have to justify with some natural right theory or just cause. It's not. It's a deal. We agree to be governed. We signed a deal. And the deal was the ratification vote, just like any long-term contract. And people who are born after the people that ratified the contract, they opt into the deal unless they want to opt out with a new constitutional convention or by amending. That's the deal. That's the Article 5 picture. When you're born, you're in, unless you don't want to be in, and there's enough of you that reform, do a new constitutional convention, or amend, basically. Now, the second thing that's happened in common law theory is that we all know, everybody in this room, Professor Strang, we all know that there are cases that exceed the terms of the original deal. We all know that. And we all have our favorites. They're just outside the scope of the original social contract. They are. And this is what has wrecked common law theory for 30 years. What happens is the best minds in the country spend all their time trying to justify a theory that can explain the oddball cases that they like on their policy. How do I save Roe versus Wade? Roe versus Wade has been driving common law theory into the bushes for years. You've got to have a theory that'll let you say Roe versus Wade was properly decided. And so you make up all this Achille Lamarr stuff so that you can fit that case in your theory. You're running a situation where you're taking oddball cases and fitting it into theories because everybody knows those cases are outside the initial social contract. They are. They just are. And so you come up with all the stuff that modern constitutional theorists come up with. The defense of those cases is more important to those common law people than any principle of interpretation. It's just a priority. And as a result, the principles of interpretation are garbage. They're just words. Okay. Finally, whatever your views on these individual provisions, whatever they are, no one who wrote anything to do with the original Constitution, who are voted on the original Constitution, had any idea that the Supreme Court would play the role that it plays today. That is way outside the social contract. No one. And to say that they had some notion that the Supreme Court could in effect amend the Constitution would have been heresy. So the one problem I have even with originalism is that originalism means you have to attack judicial review. Judicial review is not in the constitutional document. Nor was it anticipated. Nor was it thought about. So at the core of even Professor Strang's paper is judicial review. The court is going to make these decisions. They're just going to happen to decide them according to the flow chart that he has. And then they'll do the rest. But if you're really an originalist, you have to attack judicial review. I posed this question to Scalia when he came through here. Well, where in the Constitution is judicial review? Is it in the Federalist Papers? You love the Federalist Papers. Is it in there? And he said, no. And I said, well, if you're an originalist, what do you do with that? Okay. Point 4. The founders' solution to all the challenge of change and all this kind of stuff, which we had blown by, was very simple. The founders were themselves in a constitutional convention. If the Constitution doesn't work, you hold a convention and you write a new one. If you don't like what's in it, you amend it. That's the social contract. They were really aware of that because they were doing it. They not only held a new constitutional convention themselves, but they also amended the document themselves. They understood that. If you don't like the social contract, change it. A lot of our founders thought that it would be changed routinely. Jefferson So what we got into was, through judicial review, we're stuck with the language, and the judges mold the document. That's not what the founders agreed to. Under any sense of originalism, the founders didn't agree. To say it's too hard, well, tough. Amend the amending process. You don't like it? Change it. The argument that it's too hard, I talked to Justice Powell in his chambers one time, and he told me it's just too hard to amend this thing, we've got to fix it. There are errors in the original document. There are some errors there. And they had to be fixed, and it's hard to amend it. And so the Supreme Court decided they were even Justice Powell was on the right. He said we just have to fix stuff, it's just too hard to amend. The last point is my view. To me, originalism as a term is being just used just horribly all over. Everybody defines what it is, and the concept of originalism is lost its own inherent meaning. You have to sort of read the footnotes of every author to figure out what it is. There's 14, 15, 20 different views of originalism. To me, originalism is very simple. It's a line between what's required when you have to amend the Constitution versus what you can get away with when you don't amend the Constitution. Originalism is, as inherent, is a line between this is outside the social contract, we need to amend it, versus this is inside the social contract, we need to apply it. And so when you talk about originalism, you're really talking about the line between changing the rule and applying it. And that's what it's all about. Very simple. Now, the problem we have is there's too much water under the bridge. I mean, we have taken clauses in the Constitution and we have tortured them so badly. And when you do that, of course, society's expectations get hinged on the tortured clause. We have gone so far down the road that if we went really back to a true originalist view of the Constitution, we would have severe economic and personal dislocations. Severe. So our biggest problem is pragmatic. We can't go back to any sensible notion of originalism. It's impossible. So what do? Well, one thing you can do is call a constitutional convention and write a new document. Reform the social contract and deal with it that way. That's what I would prefer. The other one is that you've empowered a group of 9 justices who have become incredibly political to maneuver this country through the shoals of modern changes without an anchor. Well, sometimes, I mean, we argue it, but without a real anchor. And that's kind of, if you read the New York Times this morning, anybody look at the New York Times this morning? They talked about how the Supreme Court justices now will only hire clerks that agree with their political views. And those clerks must come from judges below that agree with their political views. And they ran the data, and it's stunning. Now, when you get a court behaving like that, you have real social problems. And the answer is not flexible originalism in hope that somebody will make an argument that won't work against the health care bill. The answer is, in my view, the only one answer, that is we hold a new constitutional convention. And we see where we are and we work it out. And we try to stop this kind of stuff. And that's kind of where I come from. The rest of it is just, you know, pretty good country, we're doing all right. Just go with the flow. Okay, questions or points from the audience? Yeah.
I have a comment. Thank you for coming, by the way. And I don't necessarily think what you're saying is in conflict with each other. I'm sympathetic to Professor Oesterle to some of your arguments, but I'm a pragmatist, and I care about liberty in the long run, and I want to win. So that provides me enough moral flexibility to go down certain paths. Now, if we want to bring change within a system, a corrupt system like the judiciary, what do? which judicial philosophy do we hitch our wagon to